But in Western Europe, there was more to fear from starvation and chaos than from the Red Army. It had been the worst winter in living memory. The war had been over for more than 2 years, and Western Europe seemed on the verge of collapse.
If Western Europe was not helped, and quickly, mass starvation would break out, and there was the real danger that Western Europe would begin moving to the left very rapidly. The analysis made within the State Department at this point indicated that the way to deal with this was not militarily. The way to deal with this was economically, to pump in between $8 and $17 billion so that the Europeans would have the money to buy food from the United States, food and other resources.
Truman had already managed to persuade a reluctant Congress to give him $400 million for the Truman Doctrine. Now, he convinced Congress to give him $13 billion more. No president had ever received so much money to aid people who weren't Americans. He called his economic aid program the Marshall Plan, after his Secretary of State, George Marshall, a man who commanded the respect of the entire country.
Some of the White House staff suggested to President Truman they didn't much like this idea of General Marshall getting credit for it. Truman was very firm on that. The Congress will do anything that George Marshall wants. If my name is on it, it probably will become controversial. I don't want it to become controversial. I want it to succeed. It's the Marshall Plan. We'll have no more talk about changing the name.
Truman would later say that the Truman Doctrine and the Marshall Plan were two halves of the same walnut. The Truman Doctrine was the military and political commitment. The Marshall Plan was the $13 billion, finally, an economic commitment to rebuild what Truman called the free peoples of the world.
It became very popular very quickly. No one expected that sort of altruism, that sort of sweeping thing coming out of it. This was much bigger than anybody had realized.
A great appeal of the Marshall Plan was that these billions that were being appropriated were being spent in the United States to farmers and manufacturers. That money wasn't spent in Europe, it was spent here. And that was a great appeal to Congress.
This was a terribly important decision. Also, it was a compassionate one and understood as such. It was a real badge of honor for Harry Truman.